The Hawkeyes have landed a legacy recruit for the class of 2025. We talk about the future of Iowa football, a big recruiting weekend. Plus, David Eickholt joins us from 24/7 Sports. All today, Locked On Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts, and you can also find us on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. If you're on the audio side of things, 5-star reviews. Greatly appreciate each and every one of you. Well, we kick off today with a little Iowa football talk on the recruiting side of things, as we have the biggest weekend coming up in Iowa football. We'll talk more later this week about that and setting up some of the potential visitors that are making their way to Iowa City. More importantly, on the potential side, guys that are going to make recruitment commitments coming up this weekend. We know in the past just how important this weekend is for Iowa football, the momentum that they had a year ago, getting basically everybody out of that group that visited that weekend to commit. Is it going to be as successful this year? We'll talk about that a little bit more. But we begin today with the commitment of legacy recruit Mason Woods. Not only, of course, his father, Levar, and what he was able to do as a football player, but still the special teams coordinator with the University of Iowa. 6'3", 210 pounds for Mason Woods. And a couple of different things. He's being recruited as an athlete, and that's where you start. When you look at him as a prospect, as a player, Iowa already has a couple of tight ends in this recruiting class. And because of that, I think that's one of the reasons you look at Mason Woods and the reason that they consider him an athlete. They already have a commitment from Eli Johnson, big wide receiver, that blocking tight end, if you will. 6'6", 230 pounds already as a high school, well, soon to be senior. Then Thomas Meyer. He is the athletic one. He is your TJ Hawkinson. He is your George Kittle. That kind of athleticism out of Thomas Meyer, and that's the thought that he's going to be. And with two tight ends already in this class, even with Iowa's ability to use two and sometimes three tight ends, you kind of wonder about the landing spot. Now, the good news with Mason Woods is there is versatility to him. Rivals has him listed 6'3", 222. On3 had him listed at 6'3.5", 210 pounds. But he's a guy that potentially can play on the other side of the football and potentially play defensively. Now, if you watch his film, one thing that definitely jumps out when you're watching Mason Woods defensively is he's not the most willing tackler, not a guy that loves contact, if you will. Now, can that be coached out of a player? We'll see. If there's a defensive back coach that can do it, if he becomes a strong safety, if he plays the cash position, even an outside linebacker, you certainly trust that Phil Parker would be one of those kind of guys that would be able to make that happen. Mason Woods also has speed, and he was on a couple of good relay teams at Iowa City West, and that's another potential. You wonder, maybe they go the other route, and it doesn't happen very often, but they retrain his body, and with Iowa's just dearth of wide receiver talent, can he slim him down? Can that happen? And you basically retool his body and go that direction. It's not likely. I wouldn't even put it. We're talking a less than a probably 5% chance of something like that happening. However, it's something to think about. So that's what you have with Mason Woods. Speaking of legacy recruits, one is not going to be coming to Iowa, and that is Mason Richmond's little brother, McGuire Richmond, who made his commitment earlier this week to Kansas State. From the Kansas City area, K-State, as you saw on the basketball front, that is a program that I think would surprise a lot of people and what they're building in terms of their NIL collective. And I don't believe this is a decision strictly that was based on NIL funds, those kind of things. I don't believe that is the case. However, they just got Coleman Hawkins on the basketball front out of Illinois and paid allegedly $2 million for the services of Coleman Hawkins. Now, if you saw Coleman Hawkins in the first Iowa-Illinois game this year, you say, yeah, that dude's worth $2 million a year in comparison to other players out there because he looked like National Player of the Year, first team All-American. That's how good he was the first time. But if you watched a little more outside of that one game of Coleman Hawkins, he's a good player, very solid, can help you out. The good news for him is there weren't a whole lot of prospects out there, and potentially some programs we're looking around that already used their funds, thought they were going to use them on potential returning guys that decided not to come back, and it led to a little bit of a bidding war, and he's going to K-State. Their football front is also in very good shape, and Iowa actually is involved a lot with a lot of Kansas State players right now, commits that I was looking at in the high school class. There's going to be a lot of head-to-head battles, and a few of those that very well could come down to the wire. The other kind of part of it was interesting when McGuire Richmond was getting ready to make his way to Iowa City coming up this weekend, as his brother wasn't even going to be in town. His brother was going to be back in Kansas City for a visit. Can you read something into that potentially? Like, you're coming on a visit and your brother's not even going to be there, who plays on the football team? A little bit off. Doesn't matter. He's not going to be coming on a visit this weekend. He's made his commitment to Kansas State. One other on the legacy recruits, if you will, and that is Yosei Epinesa. And it is a name that we've been talking about a lot, the importance of getting Yosei, his commitment. Of course, AJ, seen him the other night at the Vegas Aces game and watching his high school classmate and Kate Martin play for the Aces. And that was a really cool moment. But that aside, Epinesa, Yosei. So he is going through and continuing his visits. He took his visit a couple weeks ago to Iowa City. I wonder, again, this is the big weekend coming up this weekend that Iowa wants. Instead, he's going to be visiting Miami. Do we read anything into that? I think a little bit. I think we can, just a little bit. He's also taken official visits to Penn State, Missouri, and Utah. And that was his latest one, Utah, after the visit to Iowa. But coming up with Miami this week. And had some people, including our recruiting analysts here with Locked On, that have mentioned Miami's a real suitor here. They have the NIL funds. There's no doubt about it. It's a different era compared to when AJ was there. Iowa rolled out the red carpet. Iowa's done everything that they can. And Iowa football hasn't done anything wrong. But today is a different age. Blazing your own path. The funds that are available at a place like Miami, even compared to Iowa, that's in good shape, but not the shape of some of the other programs out there. You're left wondering a little bit. Is this one that's going to leave us a little bit heartbroken? Hope I'm wrong. Just don't have the warm, fuzzy feelings. He is ranked right now at 24/7 as the 46th player nationally overall. 15th best player, a 98 on their scale on the national rankings. The composite ranking, all of them together was 46. 24/7 has him as the 15th best player in the country. That's a 5-star by their recruiting scale. It'd be big. It'd be huge. And a guy that can get to the quarterback, and if he can be anything close to what AJ was, we're off and running. And even better, now we're daring to dream. No dream here. We've got David Eickholt coming in from 24/7 Sports, HawkeyeInsider.com. Going to talk with David about a slew of different things. We got plenty of football talk for you, a little basketball we're going to drop in, and a whole lot more. And we'll do that as we continue. This is Locked On Hawkeyes. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive today at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Let's get to David Eickholt, HawkeyeInsider.com, part of 24/7 Sports. David, Trenton, Ken, thank you for coming on. Enjoyed your piece on Sebastian Castro, who you believe is going to emerge on the defensive side of the ball for Iowa as a household name by the end of the 2024 season. I like these pieces for a number of reasons. A, gets you back thinking about football, but then when Trent and I do something like this and it turns out embarrassingly exceedingly bad, we can have some fun with each other. So the pressure's on you. We're going to clip and save this one. But why Sebastian Castro for you? He certainly had his moments. What is it about this year that you think Castro will rise to the level that you believe he's got within himself?
Yeah, I think he was the most overlooked player on Iowa's defense last season. I think he was arguably the most overlooked defensive player in the Big Ten Conference last season. I mean, remember, he made all of those fantastic plays in that Wisconsin game, single-handedly dominated that game. He could have had a pick six, decided to kneel it down instead of return it all the way. Had a big fourth down stop as well, just absolutely took over the game. And, Cooper DeJean deserved everything that he got last season. Without a doubt, one of the best cornerbacks to ever play at Iowa. Could have been one of the best Hawkeyes ever, I think, had he come back for a senior season. I still think he has a compelling case. But because all the attention was paid on him, because all the attention was paid to Jay Higgins, Sebastian Castro kind of went under the radar. I mean, Sebastian Castro was a third-team All-Big Ten, I believe, by the coaches. I think he should have been a first-team guy. He was an All-American by a couple different outlets. But you think about his game and you watch the way he just sort of emerged last season. There's no flaws in his game. He is such a high-floor player. He can hit a bigger tight end. He can get out in space and cover a wide receiver. He can blitz you up the middle. He can beat a guy off of the edge. He can do so many different things, and that's what makes him so compelling. But usually when guys have a high floor, they don't have a super high ceiling. It's kind of a make or break. I think Sebastian Castro has a very high ceiling. I think he could be the Big Ten's defensive back of the year. I think he could be a first or second team All-American. His game is just so versatile. And I just think about, I think he has a similar aura to Bob Sanders as well. And I'm not saying he's as good as Bob Sanders. Bob Sanders obviously revolutionized the Iowa defense, probably one of the core players in the Kirk Ferentz era. But he just does so many different things. He's probably one of the hardest hitters under Kirk Ferentz and Phil Parker as well. I really, really think that he's going to get the accolades and admiration from not just Iowa fans, but, pundits around the country, at least Big Ten pundits, that he probably should have gotten last season.
Speaking of him and kind of that hybrid role, the cash position that they have, we know the safety position, Wampa back and hopefully healthy for a full season, Quinn Schulte coming back. How does cornerback play out? You got Jamari Harris. You anticipate he's going to be a full-time starter again this year. Deshaun Lee, we saw a ton of. We got to see a little TJ Hall, a guy that's had a lot of injuries, but one of the better prospects that Iowa's got. And then you got John Nestor there. How do you anticipate, outside of Harris, how does that next cornerback kind of play out? And how much rotational play will we see at cornerback this year? That's
going to be one of my biggest questions heading into this season, at least on the defensive side of the ball, because I think everything else is sort of pretty much established at this point. We're turning 8 different guys. I know there's a lot of talk about John Nestor. I've heard a lot of great things about him. I think he's a ball hawk. I think he needs to continue to put on some strength, but speed and athleticism wise, he can do some different things. So I think that's encouraging. I think Deshaun Lee is going to be my early favorite. I just think that he proved a little bit last season. I think you have to start out with him. But I do think that if he gets in a struggle, I don't think Phil Parker is going to be afraid to throw in a TJ Hall or maybe some of the other guys that just sort of emerge. Personally, I would have liked to see Iowa attack the NCAA transfer portal a little bit more from that aspect, just to have an established guy at corner alongside Harris and maybe give the other guys one more year to sort of transition. But at the same time, the last thing I'm going to do about this Iowa football team is question anything that Phil Parker's coaching or making decisions over. I think he's proven everything over the last few years. But from my vantage point, from the early readings, I mean, I think it has to be Deshaun Lee. But it will be interesting to see how things sort of play out because, again, I've heard John Nestor is a dog. I've heard he's been highly competitive. I've heard he's been among the team leaders in interceptions. But at the same time, at times he can take too much of a risk, maybe give up a play or two. That probably could have been prevented had he been a little bit more cautious. So we know how much Phil Parker values smart decision-making and not giving up the big play. So my early read is I think that could keep him not out of the rotation, but I do think that that's going to be something that he's going to need to focus on. But yeah, I think it's going to be Jamari Harris, and I think it's going to be Deshaun Lee at this moment.
Would you say there's an embarrassment, sticking with that, the secondary, embarrassment of riches just because there's so much depth? Listening to you guys, it's sure you love Nestor, TJ Hall both come up. Endringer, we saw him last year. His motor doesn't stop.
Yep.
They're deep in the secondary, David, maybe more so than I thought.
Yeah, I think that's my big thing as well. The biggest question I have is what's the ceiling going to be from the opposite corner side? Because I do think that because you don't have a Cooper DeJean that locks down half the field, I think it's impossible for anybody to realistically expect anybody to do what Cooper DeJean did, even just solely on the defensive side of the ball. But this also means that Xavier Wampa could be a huge breakout player for Iowa as well, because there's going to be a lot more responsibility for him. And we know the sort of playmaker he is. I mean, obviously being from Des Moines, making some tremendous plays. Just the kid's a flat-out winner. He makes plays when they need to happen. I hope he's going to be healthy for the year so we can kind of see what he's capable of. But it will not surprise me, guys, if Xavier Wampa is going to be a top 5 safety prospect for the NFL draft after this season. I think it's very realistic that he has a chance to go to the NFL after this season. I have very high expectations for him. I know the coaching staff does as well. Pretty sure Iowa fans do also. So I wouldn't say an embarrassment of riches to this point. I still would like to see a little bit more safety depth, but I do love Cohen Entringer. I think he was the steal of that recruiting class, especially on the defensive side of the ball. But at the same time, I really want to see where the ceiling is and what's the floor right now from that opposite corner. Because Cooper DeJean was so reliable, I just need to see more snaps being run and just see a little bit more play before I say, you know what? I feel really, really good about where Iowa's at. Now, the potential is obviously there. I'm going to have sky-high expectations for the defense as a whole. I think it's another top 3 defense in the country under Phil Parker. But I do think that's definitely going to be one of their more stronger positions.
Can I interrupt for a minute? This is for both you guys. Wamka's got a decision to make potentially after this year. How many others do, Trent?
Well, a lot of guys are out of eligibility too, right? I mean, you look at this group and so many guys are super seniors. I mean, could Aaron Graves be that kind of guy? Could he put together that kind of season? In your mind, Eickholt, who else would there be?
Yeah, I was going to throw in Aaron Graves there as well, but you think about Y.A. Black's gone. Nick Jackson, after his 8th year of eligibility, is gone. Jay Higgins is gone. Quinn Schulte is gone. Xavier Wampa could be gone. Jamari Harris could be gone. I mean, Iowa's defense is going to go through a really big transition year next year. Yeah, Deontay Craig could be as well. I mean, guys.
Herkett too?
Iowa could realistically lose 10 to 11 guys next year on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, this is going to be the year where I don't want to put too much pressure on Iowa, but I know there's a lot of talk about Iowa being a potential bid stealer. I mean, you look at the schedule, you look at the defense, I can at least make the argument that could be the case. But I would say enjoy the defense this year. I still think they're going to be really good next year. But, man, it's going to be a whole new unit, it just feels like, next season.
Let's worry about that when we get past this season.
Yeah, but that's the one. I didn't realize it was that. This is a critical year for that very reason.
And the schedule's there.
And the schedule's conducive to it.
So over the weekend, met up with some buddies, and we're talking Iowa football, of course. And one of the things that came up, and we were going on, and new offense, what this going to look like. And very simply, it doesn't matter if this offensive line still sucks. And that's what it's been. It's been awful for 3 years going, and really, they haven't had a good offensive line in a decade.
Iowa standards, been a long time.
They've had individual pieces. They haven't had a good offensive line, 1 through 5, in a decade. What makes us think that's going to be different this year?
I can't make that argument for you, Trent. I mean, at this point, it's sort of like the rest of the offense. You just needs to be able to see it to believe it. Now, I am a little bit more optimistic just based on what I've heard, what I've seen just with my own eyes, what Tim Lester's trying to do, talking to people behind the scenes. I think there's reasons to be encouraged. I think that there needs to be a big step. I think getting in the top 95 of offense this year is a realistic goal. I think that if that happens and Iowa has the top 3 defense, I think you're looking at a 10-2, 11-1 caliber team. At the same time, you know, Iowa's offensive line, there really is no excuse for them not to take that big step forward, because how many guys are so experienced and continue to come back? Logan Jones is going to be back. Tyler Ellsbury, I thought, was really good the back end of last season. He really emerged in playing the best football of his career. Connor Colby, I think, could be a potential NFL guy as well. He has so much experience under his belt. Mason Richmond has a ton of experience under his belt. Nick DeYoung back for another 6th season, right? These are guys that have had a ton of football played. They've had flashes. They need to find a way to stick together because, as you mentioned, Iowa's had great individual pieces. I think collectively, just given the experience and trying to install new offense, this is a year where there needs to be some sort of consistency with the offensive line. And on top of that, Iowa has to protect Cade McNamara. I think Brendan Sullivan's capable of pushing for that one spot. I really hope there's an open competition fall camp. I've made that argument to you guys. But Iowa has to protect Cade McNamara, because if Cade's coming off his second major injury in the past 2 years and they get the offensive line that they had last year, Cade's probably not going to play all season.
What about is there a somebody on offense that could Caleb Johnson? Might he have a decision? I mean, he's a running back, right? You only have so many years at that position. Might we be having that conversation about him in December? When's he going to decide what he's going to do for his final year of eligibility, or is he going to go off to the pros? Is he got that kind of ability, do you think?
I mean, I think on paper, yes, but we just need to see him put it all together. Right. I think he has an NFL physique. I think he has an NFL mindset. I think he has an NFL attitude, but the production just needs to be there. But he has the size. He has the top end speed.
Yep.
He needs to get better going from left to right and shaking defenders a little bit more. He needs to continue to hold on to the ball. And on top of that, he just needs to stay healthy and get reps. I think that's been a really big thing for him. I mean, how many times have we heard, we battled through injuries, we've missed practice this week and got 15 carries, and then the injuries just sort of linger over. He has to stay healthy. I don't think he'll go next season unless he has a massive breakout year, because I don't know if he's going to get enough reps. Because LaShawn Williams earned a lot of respect last season. Jazan Patterson did. What about Kamari Moulton, who's now up to apparently 200 pounds? And everybody really was excited about him last season and what he showcased. I think Iowa right now, if you talk about where they have a lot of depth, I think you start at the running back room. I think they feel comfortable playing 4 or 5, maybe even 5 guys at this point in that back end. You have 3 players that for sure expect snaps, because one of the biggest shockers to me in this offseason was the fact that Iowa held on to Jazan Patterson, LaShawn Williams, and Caleb Johnson.
Yep.
We're just not in an era of football where that typically happens. So maybe he has a decision to make at the end of the year, but I just don't buy enough stock in Iowa's offense to give him that sort of leverage at this point in time.
Get some media availability coming up with some of the players. Do you guys know right now who you're all going to get at the media availability?
I know we're going to have certain position groups.
Okay.
We're not getting quarterbacks. I was really kind of hoping we would get quarterbacks. But off the top of my head, I believe it's defensive backs, offensive linemen, tight ends. I believe linebacker as well. And then I know we're going to have one other media availability probably in the next 3 weeks before Big Time Media hits, that we'll get the other position groups as well.
Let's talk a little basketball with you. I know Josh Dix had some conversations with him. This basketball team, I like the roster construction. I really do. I know they weren't able to go out and get any big fish, if you will, but the way they added in the portal, I think Traore is an intriguing prospect. I like what they have with Thelwell and a veteran guard there. I like this roster a whole lot more than last year's roster. How big is the upside in your mind for the men's basketball team?
NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you. I really buy stock into what they have as a roster. I don't want to say they needed a big fish, but I think Iowa was realistic about what they could get. Because I know people don't want to hear it, Trent. I know I'm about to say Iowa's NIL for basketball just cannot compete with the top end of the conference right now. It's just not possible. It's not realistic. But getting a guy like Drill Thelwell, who is the winningest player in Morehead State history, the way his game translates, getting Sadu Traore, I love his game.
So do I.
Rebounder, 4th leading rebounder among freshmen in the country last season, was first for the majority of the season. Not a great jump shooter, absolute freak athlete, very versatile defender, can guard positions, I think 2 to 5, realistically, maybe even 1 to 4. Maybe not like a Zach Edey or any Purdue big over the last 50 years, it feels like. But I do think Traore can do a lot of things on that end of the floor. Very good in transition. You bring back Peyton Sandford, who I think is going to come back with a vengeance after the way he performed in the NBA draft combine. Getting Josh Dix, keeping him as well. Giving Brock Harding another year to develop, Laji Dembele another year or so to develop. I mean, I think Iowa is going to be better than a lot of the pundits will put them to be. I think that realistically they should make the NCAA tournament, at least on paper.
I'm with you. And I think Traore's going to be the guy we're all talking about all winter.
Yeah.
I really do. I watched some highlights of him over the weekend package. I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes long. I had no idea he has the skill set that he does. Now, again, one of the games he was doing against Kansas, so it's not like he was playing nobodies. But we shall see. David Eickholt, HawkeyeInsider.com, 24/7 Sports. David, anything you would like to promote before we let you go?
Just stay tuned to HawkeyeInsider.com. We have a big official visit weekend, obviously, this weekend for Iowa football. I just perfected our content plan for the rest of the summer, doing a lot of roundtable stuff, podcast, everything else. So just stay locked into HawkeyeInsider.com, and we'll keep delivering.
Good stuff, David. Thank you for coming on. Talk to you in a couple of weeks.
Hey, appreciate you guys. Take care.
Thanks. I appreciate you coming on, David Eickholt, HawkeyeInsider.com.
Lots of great information there, as always, from David Eickholt. Always appreciate his time and joining us here today. We continue and wrap things up with a thought. Iowa baseball still looking for a pitching coach. I got an idea for Rick Heller. We'll talk about that as we continue Locked On Hawkeyes. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. As always, thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Well, it was one of the more disappointing seasons, not just in Iowa baseball history, but maybe Iowa athletic history. From going from a preseason top 20 team nationally to a team that doesn't make the NCAA tournament, goes 0-2 in the Big Ten tournament, and left with a lot of answers. One of the answers was, what are they going to do with pitching coach? And it was looking for a new one, and that's the direction that they're going to go. You know, when Robin Lund left the University of Iowa to make his way to the major leagues as a pitching coach, and we knew it was going to be impactful. I think it turned out to be bigger. A lot of stories, a lot of rumblings about the way this season went. Brody Brecht, as we know, going to be a top-level draft pick coming up in the amateur draft here in just a couple of weeks. He's going to hear his name called, and we'll see what his career turns out to be going forward. But it was a struggle at the beginning of the year. And though it got better towards the back half of the season, last 6-7 weeks of the year, there was some back and forth that the rumblings talked about, and some of the things out there about what he was looking to do and what the new pitching coach was working to do. The bullpen was a disaster early in the season, and though it got better, it certainly was not at the level necessary. Marcus Morgan had a terribly disappointing season. I thought Cade Obermueller was pretty good, maybe even a tick better than I anticipated, but overall, there was frustration. So there's going to be names out there. I know Kyle Huseman over at Hawkeye Report, he's thrown out a few names and a couple of ideas in some of the circles. He's very close to the Iowa baseball program, being on the beat, and he definitely has a better grasp of actual names out there in the college landscape. But if you want to shake things up, you want to do something a little bit different, I have an idea. What about Michael Barta, the Johnston head baseball coach? Barta's been there for well over 15 years now. The success speaks for itself. I've had a firsthand view of that program, calling high school baseball here in Central Iowa during really the entirety of that time frame. And the success goes without saying in terms of championships and what they're doing year in and year out, the ability to develop talent, but also they're at the forefront of the analytical part. And that's something that we know Iowa baseball is very good at. There's been plenty of former Johnston, not just baseball players, just Johnston students that are involved in their analytic department to go over and help out at the University of Iowa. I believe that Coach Heller and Coach Barta have a very good relationship. It would be different, but if you're looking for somebody and maybe a potential ascension plan down the road, that's a name I think that could make a whole lot of sense. Does he have the background of some of the people? Maybe not necessarily, but does that matter? He motivates as well as anybody. He is at the forefront of what a place like Iowa needs to do to continue to compete at the Big Ten level. I know it's a little off the board. I know it's a little bit different, but just an idea. Maybe Michael Barta make his way to the University of Iowa, and with it, coach in waiting for Iowa baseball. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Greatly appreciate all of you out there for being with us. We got more coming up later this week. Tom Kakert from HawkeyeReport.com is going to stop by. We got a ton getting ready for the recruiting weekend. We'll get into that a whole lot more on the football front, and more continuing to come in. Your team every day. That's what we do here on the Locked On Network. And also want to throw this out to you. You watch Fox Sports, ESPN all day long in your office. Maybe you work from home, whatever it is. You have to turn down the volume because of all that shouting. Well, it's time for you to make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We got you covered on the Hawkeye front. We'll be back with you tomorrow. Follow me on Twitter at Trent Condon. We'll talk to you then. Go Hawks.